Why was there a body in the mud that no one had reported missing? The rain in the Olympic Peninsula didn't fall like ordinary rain. It arrived with weight, as if the Pacific itself had decided to walk inland and settle into the forest. It soaked through the canopy, through the moss, through the boots of the 5 men moving slowly beneath it. Recon Team Raven had been awake for 31 hours. No one complained. Men like these didn't complain about rain, exhaustion, or the slow ache in their shoulders. Those things were simply part of the work. Declan Voss walked point, 24 years old, Montana raised, the kind of man who learned to read terrain before he ever learned to drive a car. The forest here was different from Montana, thicker, darker, closer. Visibility was 30 feet on a good day. Today was not a good day. His eyes moved constantly, not searching for movement. Movement could be wind. Movement could be rain. Movement could be imagination. Instead, he searched for absence. Something that didn't belong. He saw it. His fist rose slowly. Behind him, the column froze instantly. Training turned into instinct long ago. Commander Callum Reed stepped forward, crouching beside him. Voss nodded toward a shallow depression ahead. 30 meters away. Something lay in the mud. Face down. Still. Reed watched for 11 seconds before speaking. Because the first rule of a body in the field was simple. The body was never the thing you looked at. The space around it was. After 30 seconds, he motioned for the medic. Ellis Weller moved forward carefully, one knee into the mud, fingers to the neck. A pulse. Weak, irregular. She's alive. The words were quiet, almost surprised. The ghillie wrap covering her was custom built, not something bought online, not something worn by amateurs. Someone had designed it specifically for this terrain. Her clothing carried no patches, no unit, no flag. Every identifying mark had been carefully removed. Weller cut open the outer layer and found the wound immediately. Left rib cage. Entry wound. No exit. Hours old. She had packed the wound herself using strips of fabric from her own shirt. Tight, precise, controlled. Not the frantic work of someone panicking. The calm work of someone who had done this before. Self-treated, Weller said quietly. Arlo Lunn was already examining the long rifle case half buried under her body. He opened it. Inside lay a precision rifle, unlike anything he had handled before. Custom action. Fluted barrel. A scope with turret markings that weren't standard. Someone had redesigned the entire ballistic system. Lunn leaned closer to the scope housing. Tiny engraved letters. 2 words. Ghost Orchid. Reed felt something tighten in his chest. He hadn't heard that name in 2 years. The woman stirred slowly. Not dramatically, not like movies. Her eyes opened carefully. She looked at the 5 men around her. 1 glance. 2 seconds. Enough to understand everything. American Special Operations. She tried to sit up. Pain flashed across her face, but she ignored it. They betrayed me, she said. Her voice was hoarse. Reed didn't react, he simply watched her. The people who sent me, she continued quietly, they sold the route. Rain filled the silence. Who sent you? Reed asked. She looked toward the northern ridgeline. That's not the right question. A pause. The right question, she said softly, is whether you want to move before the counter-sniper on the north ridge finishes adjusting his shot. For a moment, no one moved. Even the rain seemed to hesitate. Then she added quietly, My name is Sloane Cross. And somewhere far away, hidden in the trees, a man waited with a rifle. How long can someone run before the body simply refuses to continue? Sloane Cross had been running for nearly 2 days. Not blindly, not in panic, with intention. 72 hours earlier, she had transmitted a report through what she believed was a secure channel. Weeks of intelligence work condensed into a final encrypted packet. Confirmation came within minutes. But 4 hours later, the first bullet passed 18 inches from her head. She understood immediately what that meant. Someone knew exactly where she would be. The geometry of the shot told her something else. Professional, extreme distance, elevated terrain. Whoever was hunting her knew how to shoot. So she ran. Not straight lines. Angles, terrain breaks, drainage gullies. 16 hours later, a second shot missed by 4 inches. She learned something from that shot. Wind compensation slightly delayed. Left side support bias. By the third shot, she understood the man behind her. Victor Hale, one of the finest sniper instructors the community had ever produced. Which meant something else. This wasn't random. The wound came the following morning. A bullet struck a limestone shelf beside her. Stone exploded. A fragment buried itself in her ribs. Not fatal, but dangerous. She packed the wound immediately and kept moving. 6 more hours. Finally, she found the place she needed. 2 massive root systems forming a natural depression. Thermal concealment. Limited approach angles. Sound cover from the rain. She crawled inside the hollow. And her body finally shut down. 8 hours later, Team Raven found her. Now she sat against the roots, while rain soaked the forest around them. Reed studied her carefully. He had met only a handful of people in his career who processed information the way she did. The way her eyes moved. Mapping terrain. Measuring angles. Calculating. Voss shifted slightly nearby. Sloane noticed it instantly. "Voss," she said quietly. He turned. "Come here." Her hands moved quickly across his chest and ribs. 30 seconds. Then she looked at Weller. Tension pneumothorax. Weller blinked. He checked again. She was right. 40 seconds later, the needle decompression was complete. Voss inhaled deeply. Relief washed across his face. For a moment, no one spoke. A wounded stranger had just diagnosed a life-threatening condition faster than their medic. Lund opened the hidden compartment inside her rifle case. Inside lay a laminated sheet. A target list. 4 names. 3 crossed out. The 4th name sat alone at the bottom. Callum Reed. Rain dripped from the edge of the paper. Reed looked at her calmly. "I was given the list," Sloane said quietly. "I didn't write it." A pause. "And I didn't execute it." Tanner studied the sheet over Reed's shoulder. The 3 crossed-out names belonged to 3 special operations teams killed over the last week. Extreme-range shots. No survivors. Reed looked back at her. "Why?" Sloane met his gaze. "Because I discovered something they didn't want discovered." The rain grew heavier. And somewhere on the North Ridge, Victor Hale waited patiently for his next shot. What happens when the people you trust become the ones hunting you? The drone died first. No explosion. No warning. One moment it hovered above the canopy sending video to Tanner's tablet. The next moment it spiraled silently into the trees. 11 seconds later the radio died. Encrypted signal collapsed into white noise. Active jamming. Which meant the enemy was close. Very close. Sloane had already expected it. Her eyes moved across the tree line slowly. Calculating. The shot came without warning. A bullet shattered wood 8 inches from Voss's head. No muzzle flash. No sound until the impact. Minimum 2 kilometers, Lund said after studying the trajectory. No one argued. Their rifles couldn't reach that far through this terrain. Reed crouched beside Sloan. "The man on the ridge," he said quietly, "tell me." "Victor Hale." The name changed something in Lund's expression. "He trained me," Lund said softly. Silence. Sloan continued. "The mission I was hired for was supposed to identify a foreign intelligence network." Her voice was steady. "What I found instead was a domestic one." Reed absorbed that slowly. "Inside the oversight structure of the organization that hired me." Tanner frowned. "The 3 teams killed earlier. They were investigating different threads," she said. "All of them were getting close to the same truth." Rain slid down the rifle barrel beside her. "Hale was hired to eliminate them," she continued. "And frame me for it." Weller looked at the radio equipment. "The jammer serial number," he said quietly. "It's registered to her contract." Exactly as she predicted. "If the team goes dark," Sloan said, "the evidence leads straight back to me." The forest went silent again. Reed finally asked the only question left. "Who authorized it?" She answered with names, dates, transactions. "Precise. Memorized. No documents. Just memory." Hale moved on the ridgeline. Lund spotted the first forward scout on the eastern slope. 840 meters. Sloan took the rifle. Despite the wound, despite the blood loss, she studied the terrain for 3 minutes before touching the scope. The first shot missed. Wind shift. 11 inches of deflection. Her face remained calm. 1 click of adjustment. Second shot. The eastern scout collapsed silently into the rain. 8 minutes later, she eliminated the western scout at 1,180 meters. Now the ridge sniper had no forward eyes. But he was still there. Still waiting. Still hunting. And Sloan Cross already knew the number that mattered most. 3,540 meters. The distance between her and Victor Hale. What kind of person attempts a shot most snipers would never even consider? Sloan Cross knew exactly what the shot would demand. She also knew what it would cost her body. Her pulse was falling. Blood loss increasing. Weller watched the monitor quietly. "You've got maybe 90 minutes," he said. She nodded. "That was enough." "My father taught me to shoot," she said softly. The team listened. He was a Marine gunnery sergeant. Her fingers brushed the rifle stock. "He didn't start with the rifle." She looked toward the north ridge. "He started with the wind." The canopy moved gently. Rain shifted direction. "Everything important," she whispered, "happens before the trigger." Her father had died in Fallujah when she was 12. Before joining the military, she promised her mother she wouldn't carry a rifle like he did. She had broken that promise many times, but never without reason. And today, the reason mattered. Lund finally located Hale's probable position. A rocky protrusion below the ridgeline. 80% confidence. Sloan studied the scope for a long time. Then she opened the small ammunition case. Custom rounds. Designed specifically for this encounter. "Hale knows my standard ammunition," she said. "He'll be wearing armor rated for it." She lifted one of the new rounds. But not this. The bolt closed smoothly. She lay behind the rifle, breathing slowly. The distance was brutal. Wind variation across 3 kilometers. Rain interference. Bullet drop measured in stories, not inches. But Sloane Cross had been calculating the solution for 2 days. And now the moment had arrived. The forest held its breath. The rifle waited. And the woman everyone thought was dying prepared to make the longest shot of her life. How quiet does the world become before a moment that changes everything? 3,540 meters. The number lived inside Sloane's mind. Wind at the ridgeline. Wind at the canopy. Temperature shift. Rain density. Each variable sat like a weight on invisible scales. She slowed her breathing. Her father's voice echoed in memory. Read the world first. The rifle is only the last sentence. Lun watched through the spotting scope. Reed stood behind her. No one spoke. Sloane adjusted the scope slightly. Elevation. Windage. Fractional corrections. The kind no standard training ever teaches. Because few shooters ever need them. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger. Not pulling. Just waiting. The world narrowed to 3 things. Wind. Distance. Time. Somewhere far away Victor Hale lay behind his own rifle. Confident. Patient. Certain his opponent could never reach him from this distance. He was wrong. Sloane exhaled slowly. And fired. The rifle cracked sharply through the rain. The bullet vanished into distance. Seconds stretched. 1, 2, 3. Then Lun inhaled sharply. Through the spotting scope, he saw movement collapse beside the rock. Victor Hale never fired another shot. 3,540 meters. The forest returned to its quiet rhythm. Rain continued falling. But the hunt was over. What matters more in the end, the shot, or what survives after it? Sloane didn't celebrate. She didn't smile. She simply lifted her head slowly from the rifle. Weller checked her pulse again. Still falling, but stable enough. Reed looked north one final time. Then back at her. That shot saved us. Sloane shook her head gently. No, she said. The information saves people. She slowly closed the rifle case. What I found, that network, those names. Her voice softened. That's what matters. Reed nodded. Because he understood something important in that moment. The shot was never the goal. It was only the door that made the truth possible. Extraction would come eventually. Questions would follow. Investigations. Trials. The kind of slow justice that rarely appears in headlines. But Sloane Cross had carried the truth through rain, bullets, betrayal, and blood. And she had delivered it. The forest faded behind them as the team prepared to move. The rain kept falling, as it always did. Indifferent to victory. Indifferent to pain. But somewhere inside that quiet forest, a wounded woman had proven something simple. Skill is not power. Skill is responsibility. And sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is survive long enough to tell the truth. Because dignity does not shout. It does not demand attention. Sometimes, dignity simply acts. How long can someone run before the body finally refuses to obey? Sloane Cross had been asking herself that question for the last 30 hours. Not out loud, not in panic. Quietly, methodically. Each step through the soaked forest was a calculation. Each breath a negotiation with pain. The Olympic Peninsula rain never stopped. It soaked the earth until every footstep made a soft, sucking sound. The kind of sound that traveled farther than people expected. Sloane hated that sound. It meant she had to move differently. She stepped on roots, fallen branches, stones, anything that broke the rhythm of wet soil. Not because she was afraid of being tracked, because she knew the man behind her didn't track like normal hunters. Victor Hale didn't follow footprints. He followed behavior, and behavior left patterns. She had learned that the hard way. 72 hours earlier, Sloane believed she had completed the hardest part of her mission. Weeks of slow intelligence gathering, careful observation, silent listening. It had taken patience, the kind that most operatives never developed, the kind that came from growing up around someone who taught you the value of silence. Her father had been that man, a Marine gunnery sergeant who believed rifles were the least important tool a soldier carried. The rifle only speaks once, he used to tell her. Your brain speaks the whole time before it. She had remembered that lesson when she transmitted the encrypted report. A small cabin, one laptop, one satellite burst transmission. 30 seconds. That was all it took. 30 seconds to send weeks of evidence about a covert supply route operating inside U.S. territory. At least, that was what the mission briefing had claimed. But the moment confirmation arrived from headquarters, something inside her felt wrong. Too fast. Too smooth. Real intelligence work rarely wrapped itself up so neatly. 4 hours later, the first bullet confirmed her suspicion. It struck the ground ahead of her while she moved along a narrow forest trail. Not close enough to hit. Close enough to warn. Most shooters would have missed entirely at that distance. But this shot had landed exactly where it needed to. 18 inches left of her path. She stopped immediately. Not running, not diving. Just listening. Rain filled the forest with soft static. Leaves whispered overhead. No follow-up shot came. And that told her everything. The shooter wasn't guessing. He was observing, measuring, learning her movement patterns before committing to the kill. That was the moment Sloane Cross realized her mission had changed. She wasn't returning with information anymore. She was surviving. And survival meant one thing: breaking the pattern. She left the trail immediately. Straight lines disappeared. Movement turned into angles. She moved downhill into a drainage gully, then climbed sideways across a moss-covered slope that forced her body to fight gravity with every step. Her lungs burned after the first 2 hours. After 6 hours, they simply accepted the pain. Somewhere during the night, the rain intensified. Visibility dropped even further. But that didn't help her. Victor Hale didn't need clear sightlines. He needed time. 16 hours later, the second bullet arrived. This one came closer, 4 inches above her shoulder, as she crawled across a fallen cedar trunk. The round shattered bark beside her face. She froze instantly. Not out of fear. Out of respect. Because that shot carried a signature. Wind correction slightly late. Left hand support pressure. Subtle, but unmistakable. She knew that shooting style. Every sniper community had legends. Names that appeared in training briefings and whispered conversations. Victor Hale was one of those names. Former instructor, long-range specialist, a man who believed patience was the deadliest weapon in the world. Which meant something terrifying. If Hale was hunting her, then someone powerful had ordered it. And someone powerful had lied about the mission. She continued moving. But now she wasn't just running. She was studying the man behind the rifle. How long he waited between shots. Which terrain he preferred. How he forced her into predictable escape routes. Every hunter had habits. Even the great ones. By the third shot, she began understanding his rhythm. The bullet struck a limestone shelf just ahead of her boots. Stone exploded outward. One fragment tore through her side. The pain was immediate. Sharp. Deep. But Sloane had trained her body to separate pain from panic. She rolled behind a fallen log and checked the wound. Not a direct hit. Shrapnel. Left rib cage. Bleeding steadily. She removed her outer shirt without hesitation. Fabric strips twisted tightly into compression packing. Pressure, hold, breathe. Her hands worked calmly. No wasted motion. No trembling. This wasn't the first time she had patched herself together. It wouldn't be the last. 10 minutes later, she stood again. The forest looked the same as it always did. Endless trees. Endless rain. But now every step carried weight. Blood loss had begun. Not catastrophic, but enough to slow her eventually, which meant she needed something more than movement. She needed terrain, the kind that erased advantage, the kind that forced even elite shooters into uncertainty. 6 hours later, she found it. 2 massive root systems from fallen spruce trees had created a hollow depression in the earth. Their tangled roots formed a natural wall of dirt and wood. Thermal masking, limited angles of approach, dense canopy above. Even aerial surveillance would struggle to see inside. She crawled into the hollow slowly. Her body resisted every motion now, exhaustion finally catching up. But she still had enough strength to do one more thing. She pulled the rifle case from her back, opened it. Inside lay the rifle she had built for this mission. Custom barrel, modified chamber, a scope designed for distances most shooters never attempted. The engraved words near the scope mount caught the dim forest light. Ghost orchid. Her father had loved that flower. Rare, hidden, almost impossible to find. Perfect name for a sniper, he once joked. Sloane smiled faintly at the memory. Then the exhaustion finally arrived. Her body leaned against the roots. Rain softened the world around her. Somewhere far away, Victor Hale continued searching. But for the first time since the hunt began, she disappeared. 8 hours later, Recon Team Raven would discover her lying in the mud, a wounded ghost beneath the trees. And the moment she opened her eyes and saw their rifles pointed toward the forest, she understood something important. The hunt was no longer hers alone. But there was still something she hadn't told them. Not yet. Why would a sniper destroy her own escape route? That was the question running through Commander Callum Reed's mind as he studied Sloane Cross's face. She looked pale now. Not the dramatic kind of pale seen in movies, but the quiet, steady draining of color that comes when the body is slowly losing blood. Still, her eyes were sharp, alert, thinking 3 steps ahead of everyone in the clearing. That alone made Reed uneasy, because people like Sloane didn't simply wander into forests wounded and alone. They arrived there for reasons, and those reasons usually carried consequences. Rain fell harder now, tapping softly against the leaves above them. The forest around Recon Team Raven had that strange silence that sometimes followed gunfire, a silence that felt like the earth itself was listening. Ellis Weller tightened the compression around Sloane's ribs. Bleeding slowed, he said quietly. But not stopped. Sloane nodded once. That's fine. Weller frowned slightly. Fine. If the bleeding stopped completely, she replied calmly, it would mean the fragment hit something vital. For a moment the medic had no response. The logic was brutal, but accurate. Arlo Lunn was still studying the rifle. Not just the weapon itself, but the careful modifications inside the scope housing. This turret system isn't standard, he said quietly. It's been recalibrated for extreme elevation. Sloan glanced at him. You noticed? Hard not to, Lund replied. He paused. You built this rifle for distances most shooters never attempt. That was the assignment. The word assignment hung in the damp air. Commander Reed stepped closer. Let's start there, he said. What exactly was your assignment? Sloan took a slow breath. Rainwater slid down the strands of dark hair clinging to her temple. To confirm the existence of a covert logistics network moving restricted weapons through U.S. territory. Reed waited. That's the official version, she added. And the unofficial version. A quiet pause. Sloane's eyes moved across each member of the team. Measuring. Not their weapons. Their reactions. I discovered the network wasn't foreign, she said softly. Tanner shifted his weight. What does that mean? It means the people funding the operation were inside the system meant to stop it. No one spoke for a few seconds. Even the rain seemed quieter. Domestic corruption inside intelligence operations wasn't impossible. But it was the kind of accusation that could destroy careers or lives. Reed kept his voice calm. You sent a report. Yes. And after that someone sent Victor Hale. Sloan nodded. That's when I realized the mission had changed. Lund finally looked up from the rifle. Hale trained half the long-range shooters still active today. I know, Sloan replied. Which means whoever hired him expected the job to be impossible to trace. Another silence settled between them. Then Tanner spoke. If he wanted you dead, why warn you with the first shot? Sloan didn't hesitate. He wasn't warning me. She pointed toward the slope above them. He was measuring. Voss frowned. Measuring what? My reaction time. The team exchanged glances. A hunter testing prey. But Sloan shook her head slightly. Hale doesn't hunt like that. Then how? He studies behavior. She looked toward the distant ridgeline again. The first shot forces movement. The second confirms the escape pattern. The third forces terrain. Voss suddenly understood. You weren't escaping him, he said slowly. You were following a path he predicted. Exactly. The realization settled heavily over the group. Even now, Hale might still be guiding them. Ellis Weller looked down at the small radio unit lying beside their packs. Static filled the speaker. Still jammed, he muttered. Sloan glanced toward it. That jammer belongs to my contract. Reed's eyes narrowed. What? The serial numbers will trace back to me. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Tanner cursed under his breath. They set you up as the fall guy. Yes. And if we die out here, Reed added quietly, the evidence says you killed us. Sloan met his gaze. That's the plan. The rain thickened again. Cold droplets slid down the barrels of their rifles. Somewhere beyond the trees, a distant branch snapped softly. Everyone froze. Weapons lifted instantly. But nothing followed. Just the forest breathing. Arlo Lund slowly lowered his spotting monocular. He's still out there. Sloan nodded. He won't rush. Why not? Because patience is his advantage. She studied the canopy movement. Wind direction shifting slightly west. A subtle change most people wouldn't notice. But she did. Her expression tightened. We have another problem. Reed waited. Hale never hunts alone. The team reacted instantly. Voss scanned the eastern tree line. Tanner moved west. Lund adjusted his scope. How many? Reed asked. 2 forward observers, Sloan said quietly. Maybe 3. What do they do? They closed the net. Right on cue, the forest changed again. A faint movement far to the east. Arlo Lund spotted it first. A man shifting behind a cluster of cedar trunks. Range roughly 800 meters. Too far for casual accuracy. Close enough for danger. Lund exhaled slowly. That's one. Sloane reached for her rifle. Weller immediately protested. You shouldn't. I know. Her voice was calm, but firm. She settled behind the weapon anyway. Pain flickered briefly across her face as the wound pulled against the pressure bandage. But once she lay behind the scope, something changed. The exhaustion vanished. The weakness disappeared. The woman in the mud became something else entirely. Focused. Precise. Her breathing slowed. Arlo Lund adjusted his spotting lens beside her. 840 meters, he whispered. Wind pushing right. Sloane watched through the scope. The distant observer shifted slightly, scanning the forest, waiting for instructions from the ridge. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked through the rain. The observer dropped instantly. Clean. Efficient. No wasted movement. Lund nodded once. Confirmed. 8 minutes passed. Then the second scout appeared. Further west. More cautious now. He moved slowly between trees. Sloane tracked impatiently. The shot came at 1,180 meters. The second man collapsed beside a moss-covered log. The forest returned to silence again. 2 observers gone, which left only one person controlling the hunt. Victor Hale. Commander Reed looked down at Sloane. You just changed the entire battlefield. Sloane closed the bolt quietly. Not yet. Her eyes drifted toward the far northern ridge, dark against the gray sky. Now he knows exactly where we are. Voss swallowed. And Sloane rested her cheek lightly against the rifle stock. And now the real shot begins. Reed followed her gaze. The ridge was barely visible through the mist and rain. Miles away. Almost impossible to hit. But Sloane Cross was already calculating the distance. 3,540 meters. The final shot that would decide everything. And somewhere on that distant ridge, Victor Hale was doing the exact same calculation. What kind of person attempts a shot most snipers are trained to avoid? The forest had gone quiet again. Not peaceful quiet, not the soft quiet of nature resting. This was the other kind. The quiet that arrives when 2 hunters realize they have finally found each other. Sloane Cross lay behind the rifle, her cheek pressed lightly against the worn composite stock. Rain tapped steadily against the barrel, each droplet sliding toward the muzzle before disappearing into the moss below. 3,540 meters. Even saying the number silently felt unreal. Most sniper training stopped well before half that distance. Beyond 2 kilometers, variables multiplied faster than certainty. Wind changed direction between hills. Temperature bent trajectories. Even the rotation of the earth could influence a bullet traveling that far. Which meant something important. The rifle wasn't the hardest part of the shot. The world was. Arlo Lund adjusted the spotting scope beside her. His brow tightened slightly as he studied the far ridgeline through shifting rain. I have 80% confidence on his position, he murmured. Rock formation halfway below the ridge crest. Sloane didn't move. 80% is enough. Commander Reed stood behind them, scanning the forest edges for movement. Even if Victor Hale remained on the ridge, the possibility of another observer still lingered in the back of his mind. You've got maybe 90 minutes, Ellis Weller said quietly from behind Sloane. The medic checked the pressure bandage again. Blood had slowed but not stopped. Her body temperature was beginning to drop slightly. Not critical yet, but long-range shooting required stillness. Stillness required time. And time was something Sloane's body was steadily losing. She didn't argue with the estimate. She simply nodded once. 90 minutes is enough. Voss crouched nearby, still catching his breath after the earlier lung decompression. He watched Sloane carefully now. Not with suspicion. With curiosity. You already knew this shot was coming, he said slowly. Sloane's eyes remained fixed inside the scope. Yes. You planned for him. For someone like him. A faint breeze shifted across the forest canopy. Leaves rustled gently. Sloane closed her eyes briefly. Listening. Her father's voice returned again, the way it often did when she held a rifle. He had never spoken like a drill instructor. He spoke like someone explaining the world. Wind doesn't lie, he used to say. People lie, instruments lie, but wind tells the truth about distance. When she was 12, he had taken her to a desert training range outside Yuma. She remembered the way the heat shimmered above the sand, distorting the steel targets in the distance. She had missed every shot that day. Frustrated, angry, until he took the rifle away and told her to sit beside him. Stop shooting, he said. Just watch the air. They spent 3 hours watching dust move across the ground, watching grass lean under invisible pressure, watching mirage waves dance above the hot earth. She never forgot that lesson. Now, decades later, lying wounded in a rain-soaked forest, Sloane Cross was doing the same thing again. Reading the air. Reading the world. The canopy above shifted again. A stronger gust moved through the treetops. She made a small adjustment to the scope turret. Click. Arlo Lund watched closely. You're compensating for crosswind. Yes, but we're sheltered down here. The ridge is. Lund nodded slowly. 3 kilometers of terrain between shooter and target meant the bullet would travel through multiple wind environments. Every one of them mattered. Sloane opened the small ammunition case, resting beside the rifle. Inside lay only 6 rounds. Custom-made. Each one slightly different. Different powder loads, different ballistic behavior. Lund raised an eyebrow. You prepared 6 solutions. I prepared 6 possibilities. She lifted one of the rounds between her fingers. Victor knows my standard ammunition, she said quietly. He helped design half the ballistic profiles used in this program. Reed crossed his arms. So he knows how you shoot. Yes. And he'll be wearing armor rated for it. A pause settled over the group. Sloane placed the new round into the chamber. But he doesn't know this load. The bolt slid forward with a smooth, metallic whisper. She exhaled slowly. Arlo Lund studied the ridge again through the spotting scope. Rain blurred the distant shapes, turning the rocks into vague shadows. I still can't see him clearly, he said. You won't, Sloane replied. Hale doesn't expose himself. Then how? He'll expose the rifle. Reed looked down. What does that mean? Every sniper has habits. Sloane's voice remained calm. Victor prefers left side cover. He'll position the rifle just far enough past the rock to clear the muzzle blast. She tapped the scope gently. That gives me 2 inches of metal to see. 2 inches. At 3,500 meters. Voss shook his head quietly. That's insane. Sloane didn't react. Instead, she settled deeper into position. Her breathing slowed even further now. 4 seconds in. 4 seconds out. The forest seemed to fade around her. Pain in her ribs dulled into something distant, manageable. Focus replaced everything else. She thought briefly of her mother, of the promise she had made years ago, not to follow her father's path, not to carry rifles. Life had taken her somewhere else anyway. But she had never forgotten why her father believed in the work. Not for glory, not for violence, for responsibility. A sniper didn't choose targets lightly. Every shot carried weight, sometimes moral weight heavier than the rifle itself, which was why Sloane Cross had refused to execute the names on that list, even when it meant becoming the hunted one. The wind shifted again. She adjusted the turret. Clicking. Arlo Lunn inhaled slowly as he studied the ridge. "Wait," he whispered. "There." A tiny reflection appeared beside the rock formation, barely visible, a faint glint of metal catching the gray daylight. Sloane saw it immediately. The rifle barrel. Exactly where she predicted. 3,540 meters away. Victor Hale lay behind it. Patient, confident, certain that the wounded woman in the forest could never reach him from this distance. Sloane Cross rested her finger gently on the trigger. Not pulling, just feeling the weight. Somewhere far away, another sniper waited for the moment she exposed herself. Two shooters, two rifles, miles of wind and rain between them. Commander Reed glanced down at Weller. "How long now?" The medic checked Sloane's pulse again. "Maybe 70 minutes. Reed looked back toward the ridge. 70 minutes to end a hunt that had already taken 3 days. Sloane exhaled quietly. Her eye never left the scope. Her father's voice echoed one last time in her memory. Everything important happens before the trigger. The wind slowed. Just slightly. The canopy settled. The air aligned for a brief, fragile moment. Sloane Cross felt it. The rare stillness that shooters wait years to experience. Her finger tightened. And somewhere 3.5 kilometers away, Victor Hale adjusted his own rifle. How quiet does the world become before a moment that decides everything? The rain softened. Not completely. It never completely stopped in that forest. But it shifted, turning from heavy drops into a thin mist that drifted between the trees like breath in cold air. For a sniper, that change meant something important. The wind was stabilizing. Sloane Cross didn't move. Her eye remained locked inside the scope, her body flattened against the damp ground as if the earth itself were holding her in place. 3,540 meters. Even inside her mind, the number still felt distant. But distance had never been the real enemy. Time was. Ellis Weller glanced down at the small monitor clipped beside Sloane's arm. Her pulse had slowed further. Blood loss and cold were slowly working together, draining the strength from her body. He leaned closer to Commander Reed. "She's fatting," he whispered. Reed's jaw tightened. "How long?" "Maybe an hour." Reed looked back down at Sloane. She showed no sign of hearing the conversation. But she had. Her voice came softly, calm and steady. "I heard you." Weller sighed quietly. "You should be resting." "I am resting." Her finger remained lightly on the rifle trigger. "This is the stillest my body has been in 2 days." Arlo Lunn remained beside her, eye fixed on the spotting scope. Through the shifting fog he could barely see the distant ridge anymore. But he didn't need to see clearly. He needed to watch for movement. And movement at that distance was rare. "Glint again," Lunn whispered suddenly. Sloane saw it immediately. The smallest flicker of light. Metal touching daylight for less than a second. Victor Hale adjusting his rifle. Sloane made another adjustment. Click. Barely a fraction of elevation. The bullet she planned to fire would travel for several seconds before reaching the ridge. During those seconds, the earth itself would rotate slightly beneath it. The wind would tug at its sides. Rain would create invisible turbulence along the path. At distances like this, shooting wasn't about accuracy anymore. It was about prediction. Commander Reed crouched behind her. You're calculating wind across terrain we can't even see. Yes. How? Sloane's voice stayed quiet. Trees. Reed frowned. Trees. The canopy moves differently at different elevations, she said. She nodded toward the ridge. The tall firs at the top lean west, the lower cedars lean north. Lund followed her logic. 2 wind layers. Yes. And the bullet crosses both. Another tiny adjustment. Click. Voss watched silently nearby. The man who had almost suffocated an hour ago now stared at Sloane with something close to disbelief. You planned this shot days ago, didn't you? He asked. Sloane didn't answer immediately. Instead, she studied the ridge again. Watching. Waiting. Finally, she said quietly, I knew it might come. You expected him. I expected someone like him. The mist thickened slightly. Visibility shrank. But Sloane didn't seem worried. Because Victor Hale had the same problem now. 2 shooters. Both relying on small windows of clarity. Both waiting for the other to expose something first. Far away on the ridge, Hale lay behind his rifle. Confident. He knew Sloane Cross was wounded. He knew she had been running for days. He knew the distance between them was nearly impossible. But he also knew something else. She was the only shooter he had ever trained who might attempt it anyway. Which was why he remained perfectly still. Waiting for the mistake. Back in the forest hollow, Sloane adjusted her breathing. Slow inhale. Long exhale. Her ribs ached now. The wound had begun to stiffen with cold. But pain had its advantages. Pain sharpened focus. She thought again of her father. Not the day he taught her to shoot, but the last day she saw him alive. He had been leaving for deployment, standing in the doorway with his duffel bag. She remembered asking him a simple question. Are you scared? He had smiled slightly. Of course. That answer surprised her. Then why go? He knelt beside her. Because courage isn't about not being afraid, he said. It's about deciding something else matters more. Now, lying in the wet forest with a rifle pressed against her shoulder, Sloane finally understood exactly what he meant. This shot wasn't about pride. It wasn't about proving skill. It was about ending a hunt that should never have begun. About stopping a man hired to silence the truth. Arlo Lund inhaled sharply. Movement, he whispered. Sloane saw it. A shadow shifting behind the rock. Just enough motion to confirm the exact position. Victor Hale preparing his own shot. 2 rifles aligned across miles of wilderness. 2 shooters reading the same wind. 2 minds calculating the same impossible math. But Sloane Cross had one advantage. She had already accepted something Hale hadn't. This might be her last shot. And that made hesitation impossible. Her breathing slowed further. Her heartbeat steadied. The world narrowed until only 3 things remained. Wind. Distance. Time. Her finger tightened slowly on the trigger. The rifle cracked through the mist. The recoil pressed into her shoulder. Then the bullet disappeared into the gray distance. Seconds stretched. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5. No one moved. Even the forest seemed to pause. Then Arlo Lund gasped softly. Through the spotting scope, he saw the figure beside the rock collapse sideways. Victor Hale never fired his own shot. 3,540 meters. The longest shot any of them had ever witnessed. The forest exhaled again. Rain resumed its steady rhythm. Sloane lowered her head slowly from the rifle. Her strength faded almost immediately now that the tension had broken. Ellis Weller caught her shoulder before she slumped forward. "Easy," he said. But Sloane wasn't panicking. She looked toward the ridge one last time. Not with triumph. With quiet acceptance. The hunt was over. And somewhere far across the valley, a rifle lay silent beside a fallen man. What happens after the shot everyone remembers, but no one truly understands. The forest didn't cheer. It didn't react at all. Rain continued falling through the canopy, tapping gently against leaves, branches, rifles, and the quiet hollow where Sloane Cross lay in the mud. The moment that had taken days of running, calculating, bleeding, and waiting, ended with a single sound. One rifle crack. Then silence. Arlo Lund kept his eye pressed against the spotting scope longer than necessary, just to be certain. At that distance mistakes could happen. Shadows could lie. A body falling could sometimes be nothing more than a trick of terrain. But this time there was no doubt. Victor Hale's position remained still. No movement. No return fire. Just a dark shape beside the rock. Lund slowly lowered the scope. "He's down," he said quietly. No one celebrated. Not because they weren't relieved, but because people who lived this kind of work understood something important. Every successful shot carried weight, even when the target deserved it. Commander Callum Reed exhaled slowly and looked down at Sloane. She was still lying behind the rifle, but the energy that had filled her moments earlier was gone. Her body sagged slightly against the damp ground as exhaustion finally reclaimed its territory. Ellis Weller was already beside her. He checked the bandage at her ribs again. The bleeding had worsened during the shot. Extreme stillness had slowed circulation earlier, but now her body was beginning to shake from cold and fatigue. "She needs evacuation," Weller said. "Soon." Sloane blinked slowly, trying to refocus her vision. "I'm still here," she murmured. Weller gave a tired half-smile. "I know." Arlo Lund gently took the rifle from her hands and secured the safety. For a moment he studied the weapon. Ghost Orchid. The engraved words glistened faintly in the rain. 3,540 meters, he said quietly. Even saying the number felt strange. Voss crouched nearby, shaking his head. "I've trained my whole career," he said. "I've seen good shooters, great shooters." He looked at Sloane. "But that..." He didn't finish the sentence. Because there wasn't really a word for it. Sloane slowly pushed herself into a sitting position with Weller's help. Pain flashed across her face again, sharper now that the adrenaline had faded. But she ignored it. Her eyes moved to the small laminated sheet Tanner still held. The list. 4 names. 3 crossed out. 1 still visible. Callum Reed. Reed met her gaze calmly. "You didn't take the shot," he said. "No. You had the chance." "Yes." "Why?" Sloane studied him for a long moment before answering. Because something about the order felt wrong. Rain dripped from the trees behind them. "Every other name on that list," she continued quietly, "belonged to teams investigating the same network I was." Reed nodded slowly. "So if I had followed the order, I would have become the final piece of the cover story." "Yes." Tanner looked back down at the sheet. They wanted the deaths to look like the work of one rogue sniper. Sloan nodded. And when I disappeared, the blame would land on me. Arlo Lund slid the rifle carefully back into its case. Which means whoever built this operation thought they could erase the truth. Exactly. Reed stared toward the distant ridge again. Victor Hale was insurance. Yes. The best. Weller finished reinforcing the bandage and wrapped a thermal blanket around Sloane's shoulders. You're lucky, he said. Lucky people don't get hunted for 72 hours, she replied quietly. He smirked. Lucky people survive it. Sloane didn't answer. Instead, she watched the rain drift between the trees. For the first time in days, her mind slowed. The tension that had held her upright finally began to release. And with it came a strange emotion she hadn't expected. Relief. Not the dramatic kind. Just a quiet sense that the world had tilted slightly back toward balance. Commander Reed activated the emergency satellite transmitter from a protected pouch. The jammer that had been blocking their radios earlier had likely died with its operator. The signal took a few seconds to lock. Then the small screen flashed confirmation. Extraction request sent. Help was coming. It might take time, but it was coming. Voss leaned against a tree and let out a long breath. You know, he said, when we first found you, I thought we were rescuing a lost operative. He glanced toward the ridge again. Turns out we walked into someone else's war. Sloane shook her head slightly. No. Voss frowned. What do you mean? She gestured toward the forest around them. This was never a war. Then what was it? Sloane took a slow breath before answering. A correction. The word hung quietly between them. Because sometimes that was what truth looked like. Not a dramatic battle. Not a heroic charge. Just one person refusing to carry out the wrong order. One person deciding that silence was no longer acceptable. Arlo Lund finally closed the rifle case and handed it back to her. You'll probably be asked about that shot for the rest of your life, he said. Sloane looked at the case, then at the misty ridge far away. They'll ask about the distance, she said softly. They'll ask about the wind. Exactly. But those aren't the important parts. Lund raised an eyebrow. What is? Sloane pulled the thermal blanket tighter around her shoulders. The important part, she said, is why the shot had to be taken. The forest grew quiet again. Somewhere far away, a helicopter would eventually arrive. Investigations would follow. Documents would surface. Names would be exposed. And the network Sloane discovered would begin to unravel piece by piece. Slow justice. The kind that rarely made headlines. But the truth would survive. And sometimes, that was enough. Commander Reed looked down at her once more. You carried that truth a long way. Sloane gave a faint, tired smile. Just far enough. Rain continued falling through the towering trees as the team prepared to move toward the extraction point. Behind them, somewhere on a distant ridge, a rifle lay silent beside a man who had once believed patience made him unstoppable. But patience alone had never been the strongest force in the world. Integrity was stronger. And sometimes the quietest strength came from the people others underestimated. Because dignity rarely announces itself. It doesn't shout. It doesn't boast. Sometimes, dignity simply acts.